Tommy Shepherd.
Thank you, Ms Buck. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and I'd like to thank my honourable friend for bringing this debate before us and give us the opportunity to consider this today. We've spent a lot of time this year considering the anniversaries related to universal suffrage, and every time I think about this, I think it's remarkable, not how long ago this was, but how recent it actually was. I mean, the beginning of the 20th century was an age of modernity. There were motor cars and aeroplanes and radio and television. There were new advances and new thinking in science and technology. There was an avant-garde in the arts and architecture and music. And yet, while all that was happening, 1/2 of our population or more were denied the basic political rights that were given to the other half. That just seems on reflection to be such a monstrous injustice, and the fact that it could have existed for so long while our modern constitution was being shaped is a source of great shame, I think, and a black mark on the collective history of all of us. And of course, it has been a long time coming. It was a long time coming even when it happened. I spent some time recently looking at the political agitation of the late 18th century. Thomas Muir in Scotland, Thomas Paine here, Wolfe Tone in Ireland. People agitating for universal suffrage, for basic political suffrage in an age when there was none. And the role of women was live and present there in those debates, if you look back. Since we have time, I just wanted to read into the record the opening lines from a poem by Robert Burns, written in 1792. While Europe's eyes is fixed on mighty things, the fate of empires and the fall of kings, while quacks of state must each produce his plan, and even children lisp the rights of man. Amid this mighty fuss, just let me mention, the rights of women merit some attention. An indication in 1792 that this was a live discussion about the political rights distributed amongst men and women. And of course, if you look at the exhibition just outside, you can see that throughout the 19th century, there was agitation during the reform acts of the 1830s and driving on throughout that century. People were asking for this for a very long time. And it really, I mean, it's hard to imagine now, but the organization, the political organization of men in this country, and the degree to which that patriarchy practiced its misogyny and its exclusion is quite phenomenal, that it took so long for these, and so many decades and generations, for these most basic of reforms to be achieved. The other thing I'd like to say is that, of course, it is an end in itself, having the right to vote, but increasing the franchise and bringing women into the electorate and then into Parliament, of course, achieved many other great ends as well. And in particular, it overcame much exclusion and inequality and discrimination that existed throughout every aspect of social policy. And even in the period 1818 to 1839, you can see many advances in social and economic legislation which was to improve the betterment of women in our society. And that task needs to go on today. And it's sad that we have to admit this, but I think it is a fact that there is a correlation between the involvement of women in the rules that govern our society and the effect those rules have on sexual inequality. And I hope we are beginning to the nearing of the end in this. I hope we are beginning to get to a situation where we will have genuine equality and where our policy, our public policy in this country will genuinely be equal. But as colleagues have said, we're still at it. We have a situation where government policy today still effectively has a worse effect on women in our society than it does in men. The welfare cuts that have been talked about falling mainly on women. The rape clause, the fact that women now have to prove that they've been raped to get child benefit for the third child. The waspy inequality, the ham-fisted way in which I think all of us agree that men and women should have equal pension rights, but the ham-fisted way in which it was brought in and the denial and the breaking of an obligation and guarantee given to so many women born in the 1950s is a monstrous act of government policy. So these things are still with us today. I would certainly give way, yeah.
Can I say that the mistakes around the WASPI women about not informing people about changes is still happening today? The change in universal credit of women transitioning with their families onto universal credit, if they've got more than 2 children, they're not being told that they will lose the benefit after that 2-child cut-off period. So there's an opportunity to learn the lessons that we've seen from WASPI to help women, especially with 3 children, understand that there are cuts coming for them. But that has not been done by government at the moment.
Indeed there is, and it would probably be unfair to expect the Cabinet Office Minister to respond on that point on behalf of the government. Perhaps she might give a commitment to take it back and discuss it with colleagues. It would be remiss of me not to speak on behalf of the SNP without saying something about the many great women in my own party who have contributed much, not just to the politics of Scotland, but to the politics of the United Kingdom as a whole. I wanted to mention just 3. Winnie Ewing, who in 1967 tore the establishment apart in the Hamilton by-election and surprised everyone in British politics by winning that by-election and coming to begin 51 years of unbroken representation by my party in this place. A decade later, Margaret MacDonald, who did the same in not 1 but 2 by-elections, upturning the political firmament and in many ways creating the conditions that have led to the modern political dynamic in Scotland today. And of course, Nicola Sturgeon, our First Minister in Scotland, who has been a beacon and an inspiration and a role model for young women, not just in Scotland, but I think throughout Europe and the modern world. Nicola Sturgeon presides over one of the few cabinets in government which is gender balanced and is made up half of women and half of men. It has been praised by the United Nations as a role model. And the Scottish Government is moving forward in many other respects to try and improve the representation of women in public life, setting targets and quotas for the representation in our public boardrooms and hoping to move in to encourage the private sector to follow suit in that direction. Now, I have to say this, that there's been a big debate about quotas and whether they are a right and proper thing and whether they genuinely advance women or whether in some ways they are unnecessary and they are patronising to women. But I have to say this, that my experience is quite clear, that quotas is a way of breaking the inertia and stasis that surrounds the current system. It's a way of asking and answering a question about are women capable of doing the job. And when given the chance, they are manifestly not just capable, but in my view, more capable than their male counterparts. That is the experience of the Scottish Government in action, and it's one perhaps that the rest of the United Kingdom might choose to learn from. Chair? Yes, happy to.
I'm very grateful to him raising the issue of quotas, because obviously here we know that the Labour Party has the highest proportion of female MPs, and that has only been achieved through all-women shortlists. Yeah. And it's a mechanism which has been put in place to make that change. Does he agree with me that he would like to see similar mechanisms put in place across all political parties?
Well, yes. I mean, I'm not saying we should copy the Labour Party rulebook necessarily, but certainly a similar objective and similar mechanisms should be put in place to achieve that objective. In my own party, we have something similar, not for every seat, but where in a seat we do not hold, many are designated for as all-women shortlists and a female candidate is selected. That has had the effect in Scotland, by the way, of 43% of the governing party, of my party, being women. Still not 50, but 43% is a long way forward from the position that many other parties can boast. So yes, I agree with that. And in doing this, of course, they have their obsolescence built within them, these policies. Because once they achieve the desired effect, then they become no longer necessary. Chair, I'd like just to finish by reference to 2 things. I think that if we're taking a moment to reflect on the 90th anniversary of universal suffrage and the 100th anniversary, of course, of the beginning of votes for women, I think we should also consider what we can do as an international player across the globe, because there are many countries where the rights of women are still akin to what they were in this country 90 and 100 years ago. And I do think much more this needs to be built into our foreign policy. And again, I don't expect the Cabinet Minister to give a response in this, but it seems to me that our relationship with other countries in this world should be conditioned and qualified by the way in which they treat their own citizens, and particularly the way in which they treat women within their society. And I don't think we should be having beneficial relations and rolling out the red carpet and signing arms deals or whatever with countries who manifestly practice discrimination within their own borders. And that would be a matter of bringing principle into politics and government policy, which I think would be long overdue. And perhaps in this 100th and 90th anniversary, as we look forward, that might be a practical contribution we can make in order to celebrate the gains already made, but to recognise how much still needs to be done throughout the world.